Welcome to MetaPod, the podcast where we discuss operational execs and organizations that make and move stuff, and our common headaches, digital transformation, the forever labor shortage, and doing more with less. And now, the host of MetaPod, Ron Crabtree.
It's Ron Crabtree here, and I'm back with you for another edition of MetaPod. And I'm really happy to have with us here in this discussion, Gary Smith. And we think about those three common challenges organizations face around, the forever labor shortage, digitization, digital transformation challenges, needing to do more with less. There's nothing that epitomizes this problem and these kinds of challenges than the end-to-end supply chain operations. And this can be companies that make and move stuff, or just organizations that buy and consume a lot of stuff as part of what they do to deliver services and products and what have you to market. So in this discussion, I'll have Gary introduce himself in a moment, but Gary's going to really zero in on, with respect to end-to-end supply chain operations, what are the three key areas that any organization should really take a hard look at with respect to those challenges, and then come back after we discuss that, and then assuming that you do have those sorts of challenges in end-to-end supply chain operations, what do you do? What's the practical advice to go slay some of those demons and mitigate those risk challenges or take advantage of the opportunities that may lie with those? So before we get into that, hey, Gary, tell us a little bit about you and your background.
Well, thanks, Ron. Of course, you and I have known each other for a number of years. In fact, I think the first time we met was at an Apex conference probably a dozen years ago, and you were actually the first presentation I ever attended.
Well, really, Apex and now ASCM. Well, that's interesting. We had out in Vegas?
That was in Vegas at the Encore. Remember that year when we were, we got switched over because it flooded in Memphis or Nashville or something like that. But anyway, we went out there and I remember you saying, and it always stuck with me, that you said, you kind of quoted John Cotter and said that like 90% of transformation efforts fail because they fail to take into consideration the human element, the people part of it. And that always stuck in my head, and I've seen it over and over and over again. And a lot of what I've done in the years, past, and I've been in supply chain, recently retired after 40 years in supply chain, I kept that in my head, and I always tried to involve people in the process in making them change engines as well. But my background, just to give you an idea, I've spent 40 years in supply chain, the last almost 20 of it in the public sector. And then I spent the previous 20 in the private sector as a consultant, et cetera. Recently retired from New York City Transit Authority from their supply chain group, where I was vice president of supply logistics and also the chief of enterprise asset management and supply chain management. Since then, and as part of this, I've published numerous articles on supply chain. And this past summer, I actually was an adjunct professor for Rutgers University in one of their undergraduate classes and taught an undergraduate class in supply chain. And right now, I just launched bi-monthly supply chain newsletter on LinkedIn called The Bridge.
Oh.
So that kind of brings me up to Kate.
Awesome. So just out of curiosity, you said, you're running supply chain operations for the city of New York. What was the annual approximate spend under management in that group?
It was in the billions. I mean, easily, and this is just the part that I dealt with was in the repair and maintenance of buses and subways. And so we bought all the parts that were used to repair subway cars and buses. And so that was in the billions. And everything from reconditioning, and we also reconditioned bus radiators and transmissions, and also had to deal with buses when they were damaged.
Right.
Due to wrecks or things like that, which luckily didn't happen very often, but inevitably several times a week you'd get a bus that would have a mirror knocked off of it or something like that. But, and things like that, which are basically really safety issues that we've got to deal with all the time.
Exactly. So what I'll try to make the point is, the city of New York their spend is probably the same or greater than many states or the entire states with respect to, what they're doing. And Gary came up through industry, but the problems that we're going to discuss here aren't limited to just manufacturing. It's just any organization that consumes, buys, uses, and maintains a lot of stuff has got these problems. So Gary, let's get into those three diagnostics. What would you say are those three key areas that any organization should really evaluate in end-to-end supply chain operations with respect to the challenges we face? And then break those down a little bit for us, one at a time with, how do you go assess that, determine if there's a real opportunity?
Okay. So three things that I've been dealing with and have dealt with in the past and continue to see and write and talk about. The first thing is the emphasis right now, and if your company is not transitioning towards digital technology and moving into paperless operations and going completely digital, you're behind the eight ball. And you need to go digital in this new and what I call post-COVID era. And at the same time, if you're not considering artificial intelligence in your software and as far as supply chain, et cetera, you really need to start looking at integrating software that has an AI component in it. Because what's happening is change is happening in the supply chain and in manufacturing and industry at warp speed now. And in order to, we have to embrace this change. And if you don't, you're basically going to be roadkill. And then along the same lines, I'm also saying that successful companies need to leverage what I call the four elements of supply chain. I think all supply chains include these parts: people, material, equipment, and space. And they need to be used to their advantage, because if you're not, you're going to be consumed by the marketplace. And finally, the organizations need to look and try to transition from an emphasis of what I call shareholder primacy, and we'll talk about this in detail because I know you're interested in this. Shareholder primacy and quarterly earnings, short-term profits, things like that, and move to where we're focusing from that pre-COVID focus to more of a post-COVID focus that emphasizes people first and what we call the triple bottom line.
All right, very good. In fact, I forgot to mention it, at the onset, but one of the things I like about Gary's premise for this discussion is the post-COVID supply chain. Everything is wrong, and so now I'm interested in, that in that diagnostic. What do we need to be looking at that we didn't really have a counter before, right? So go ahead and take a deeper dive on those three diagnostics.
Right. Yeah, I use that term, everything is wrong, slightly tongue-in-cheek, but the problem is that people do have, companies and management organizations have a tendency not to want to change. I mean, we all resist change to some degree. But the thing is that in the new world, we're going to have to embrace it. I mean, for example, just by way of providing some color commentary out of this, if you look back and you look at the Fortune 500 list from 1955, only 60 of those companies existed in 2017, 62 years later. The other 440 were gone. They were either went out of business or were consumed by other companies, et cetera, but they were gone. And more recently, if you look at it, then the Fortune 500 from 2000, already in 20 years later, only 260 were left. So it's almost half of the Fortune 500 doesn't exist anymore that existed 20 years ago. And you look at individual companies that have gone belly up in the last decade: Kodak, Polaroid, Blockbuster. We all know that story when Blockbuster went belly up, with Borders Group, and also a lot of retail. And we'll talk about e-commerce and retail too, but because that always fascinates me. And the things like the Sports Authority, Toys R Us, American Apparel, they're all gone. And they don't exist anymore. And we've,
all right. So let me interrupt there. So now you've got a burning platform build now. Like, okay, this is a big deal because, the rate that organizations fail, the speed at which they fail is increasing, and it's becoming harder and harder to be successful. So that's a really good point. So what are we looking for? Like, what's the advice you might give to the board of directors? They're going to walk down the hall and talk to the guys in supply chain, for example, and what should they be asking to begin to gauge the risk or opportunity around this?
Well, I would be looking into things like being able to prove your supply chains and keep your supply chains secure by looking at blockchain technologies.
Okay.
I would also look at, I believe we've been importing so many of virtually, if you're not importing goods, you're importing parts from overseas, et cetera. And a lot of it, the vast majority of it comes from China. The issue there is that we've seen in the post-COVID world, we've seen shortages, et cetera, caused by a bunch of different things. But the thing is that we should be looking at reshoring or regionalization of supply chains. In other words, maybe moving things to Mexico or operations and looking for suppliers there.
All right. So we're basically walking down the hall and say, talk to me. What are we doing?
Mm-hmm.
All right. How far along are we? Show me the need here with respect to what research have we done, and we went to understand our exposure. Can you show me the proof that we've actually looked at that stuff here?
Exactly, Ron. And the thing is, what I've found out in many cases is that companies, when they're sourcing material, really don't know where that material is coming from in a lot of cases. I mean, when they may have a fairly decent handle on their tier one suppliers, which are the ones they're buying directly from. Mm-hmm. But where are those suppliers getting their supplies? And are they buying things that are at risk of coming into short supply or getting cut off or whatever? So you got to dig deeper into not only your tier one suppliers, but also maybe even tier 2 and 3 in some cases, depending on where those parts are coming from.
Okay.
But the thing is that what we're also seeing is that disruptions such as, COVID, but that's the biggie, but disruptions are only going to increase as technology advances and improves, because we're coming up with new ways of doing things, new companies that are disrupting technology. And that can be good, but that can also be bad depending on where you are in the supply chain and what you're doing, and how you get ahead of it is going to be important in the future. So right now we're in the midst of what they call technology 4.0, which is they call it the fourth industrial revolution. Because the first one was steam, the second was electricity, the third one was computers. Now we've got AI and automation, robotics, et cetera. And what's happening there is we need to be able to embrace change and accept change at the warp speed that it's coming at, and actually try to, where we can, get ahead of it wherever we can.
Would you happen to have an example of, what would be evidence that we have a gap? Or, a situation where, that's something that's probably a problem we need to deal with. Any story you might tell here, or a specific example?
Well, you hear the stories all the time about driver shortage in trucking, and you also see the people shortages in supply chains, et cetera, as far as warehouse workers and things like that. But just coming up with new types of products, et cetera. I use this, and it sounds a little strange, but I use this example because this guy really inspires me. It's a guy named Jesse Cole, and he's the owner of the Savannah Bananas. And I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but
Savannah Bananas. Okay.
Right. Look him up, because he bought basically a regional semi-pro baseball team.
Okay.
And he morphed it into a true entertainment experience. This is a company that they're sort of basically the Harlem Globetrotters on steroids. Okay. They sell out every one of their baseball games, that because they're an entertainment experience, they sell out a lot of their away games. They play the pros. They actually sometimes beat the pros, but they play this version of baseball called banana ball. It's only got 7 innings. It's, it moves fast. It's quick. It's entertainment, and people absolutely love it. And the other thing is, the price of the seat is all inclusive, meaning that it includes all of your food, your drinks, etc. And the entertainment out there on the field. They sell a lot of their hats and gloves and jerseys and all this kind of stuff. And they make the spectators part of the game. And it's interesting. And every couple of weeks, they'll post a 1-minute thing on LinkedIn. And it's always interesting and entertaining to listen to as far as coming up with really great ideas for managing your team and or your people, et cetera, whether it's sales, whether it's marketing, whether it's supply chain, et cetera. And he's really inspirational. And he's just a young guy that started this whole process. And so I get a lot of interest out of that.
Okay, thank you. So what would be the next area we think we should be looking at from a diagnostic perspective, or do you think it's time to move on to the advice?
Well, other than the disruptions, I mean, we've got to learn to be comfortable in making decisions without all the facts. The problem we have with a lot of companies is they want to gather all the facts. And we're dealing in a world that is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And we don't have all the facts all the time. But we got to learn to be able to utilize our data and be able to leverage AI, et cetera, to be able to drive things such as predictive maintenance, et cetera, using digital twins, et cetera, to provide some realistic environments to base decisions and assumptions. Because you're not going to have all the facts. And if you wait for all the facts, you're going to lose.
Right. Interesting. Very good.
So one of the other issues, again, what we've seen in supply chains now, because in the post-COVID world, is we've seen issues with the 4 elements of the supply chain. And what's happened there is that we found that we had to protect people and maintain their health. So we sent people home and then we brought them back, et cetera. And got to give credit where credit's due as far as being able to come up with a vaccine that worked, that is continuing to work, et cetera, and is keeping people, and has really stopped COVID in its tracks, even though it's mutating, et cetera. But the thing is that whole process caused a lot of issues in that equipment was found in the wrong places, material was short, shortages around the world as far as, we all know the toilet paper issues and things like that. But as we shifted our manufacturing from commercial to consumer or consumer to commercial, we realized that it caused shortages. And we've seen the rise of e-commerce as the fact that when we sent people home, we started working from home. We started going to school from home. We started eating more at home. And it changed the whole dynamic as far as those processes. And that made some huge changes in all the dynamics of the supply chain.
Yeah, awesome. So what should we be looking at next then in terms of examining, the threat or the opportunity side of it? Is there anything else you want to tackle here before we talk about, what we go do about those problems?
I mean, we have to look at the fact that companies in the pre-COVID world consolidated. And as they did that, they did things such as shut down plants that, for example, that might have been older plants and that, et cetera, and they weren't making things at an economic level, that could keep the economy going. And so what they did there, though, is by doing that in some cases, they actually reduced the amount of material that could be made. So, for example, meat, there's now like 5 major producers that produce beef and chicken and pork in the United States. And when they bought other companies and shut down their production plants for the sake of efficiency, what they found out later is that they, in effect, created shortages. And therefore, prices went up and shortages happened and prices went up. And we saw things like meat shortages. We've seen, shortages in cleaning supplies for, at homes, et cetera. Baking, you saw a big shortage of flour and things like that as people stayed home and invested in things like baking and cooking from home and things like that. So a lot of that. So those are the types of things that companies have had to invest more in capacity and look at, changing their focus from what I look at as inwardly directed strategies that reduce cost and increase shareholder value. And they need to invest more in strategies that are more outwardly directed. And for example, that would improve customer service and long-term value for a company. And companies have now realized that to survive, they have to invest in strategies that reduce risk, are cost-effective, and really provide end-to-end inventory accuracy. What they had been doing is focusing on cost reduction and efficiency and inventory accuracy. And so what we're looking at now is we've got to take a more broader look at what we're doing as far as how we're producing materials, et cetera, and that we're looking at things that with more with the customer in mind. How do we satisfy the customer? And how do we look at things for the long term?
All right, cool. So we kind of moved into, the go-do. I get the cheat because I have Gary's cheat notes here for what we were going to talk about here today. And it feels like, let's go deeper into this. What do we do in terms of, what's the go-do, right? To get out in front of this, not be victim to the continuing malaise from the COVID pandemic helped precipitate. And, we have to re-question everything we were doing because acceleration of technology, which you talked about, the rate at which organizations fail is increasing. So it's becoming harder and harder to be viable. And I think you started getting into, some of your notes here about, embracing change, and et cetera. So could you dig a little deeper now into what do we go do to not be victim to this malaise that continues?
Well, first of all, again, we go back to the fact that companies need to embrace change rather than avoid it. And that's going to require revisions in how they manage risk and how they look at their strategic planning. They need to emphasize decision-making at all levels of the company and allow decisions to be made at all levels of the company. And it's going to require investing in people as far as hiring the right people and training the right people, investing in the right equipment and hardware and software as far as equipment is concerned, and also material handling equipment and space. We need to make those changes, investing in software that, as I said earlier, that incorporate artificial intelligence and machine learning, and also learn to work with people. So, for example, I always said when we manage processes, we have to go from making every decision to letting the computer and the system make the routine decisions and allow people to make the higher level decisions. And that's because if your people are doing nothing but managing the day-to-day, put this here, put that there, put this here, when you can invest in technology that would allow the computer to make a lot of those decisions, then they can be used to make the higher level decisions of understanding, this isn't coming in today, how do I deal with this? Or this came in early, how do I deal with it? Or how do I manage the supplier to provide material that is quality because their quality has fallen off? How do I measure that quality? Because those are the type of things, in other words, changing your focus in your KPIs so that they look out toward the suppliers and also forward to your customers.
So that you did a pretty good job there of expanding a bit, when we emphasize decision-making at all levels, there's a nuance to that, right? Not only from a people perspective, but leveraging technology to help us with some of that routine decision-making and pulling the trigger or conditional, do this, if that, and what have you, to free up people to focus on the stuff that really makes a difference. So that's pretty cool. So what's the next area you think we should go do from an action perspective?
Well, again, we need to focus, we talk about risk reduction, effective processes, et cetera. We need to look at, from a sourcing perspective, looking at regionalization and reshoring, et cetera. And we also need to realize that remote work is going to continue as technology advances. We need to make sure that we take care of our people, that we allow them, we train them, and we give them the tools that they need in order to make the best decisions possible and trust them to make those decisions. Because what's happening is the world is beginning to transition again, and we're looking toward, I said we're in Industry 4.0 right now. Well, we're in some cases, and we're soon going to be entering Industry 5.0, where there's going to be an emphasis on respect for people at the center of the production process. And they're going to be collaborating with robots and automation and forming more of a balanced approach to industry. And this is going to require a workforce that's engaged. The problem that we have today with many companies that look inwardly is that their workforce has become disengaged. They don't care anymore. Now, you've heard the term quiet quitting.
Right.
Quiet quitting basically means doing just the bare minimum to get by. I only show up when I show up, sometimes take time off, but never so much that I get yelled at, or I'd only do what I'm told and no more. Because, hey, if they're going to lay me off, they're going to lay me off, that type of thing. And you need to be able to develop, and this is a culture thing, develop a culture within your company companies are going to have to learn to trust their employees and to have their backs and to be able to keep people engaged and interested. Because if you keep them engaged and interested, then they're going to be more productive. They're going to be there on time. They're going to be happy to help, and they're going to come up with ideas that will, improve the operation incredibly. And the other thing is we're seeing that we need to look at sustainability and looking at renewable energy, promoting sustainable procurement, developing circular supply chains, and move towards wherever we can to closed loop systems. I mean, I look at, one of the things that I look at and say is a natural is warehouses are usually large, flat roof buildings. Why not put solar panels on the top and create your own power to be able to run everything in the plant, to be able to run the material handling equipment, the air conditioning, the heating, the computer systems, etc., and have your backups so that you have those things when, if there's a problem. But companies that create their own renewable sources of energy save millions and millions of dollars a year.
Yep, exactly. Very interesting. So when you talk about how that interesting, the notion of a circular loop or a closed loop, I'm wondering what you mean kind of like owning that from its development to introduction to consumption and then the reverse supply chain for recycle reuse. Is that what you mean by that, or do you mean something different?
Well, I all of that, yes.
Okay.
I mean, for one of the examples that I look at, and from my transportation background, is the fact that we at the MTA would recondition bus radiators and transmissions. So we would send those, after a period of time, we would take the transmission out of the bus, send it someplace where it was totally reconditioned. We'd do the same thing with the radiators, where it would be flushed and rebuilt, et cetera, and brought back, which effectively extended the life of the bus. We did the same thing in a lot of cases with subway cars as well. I mean, a subway car is a multi-million-dollar piece of equipment. And it's interesting because its life can be as long as an aircraft. An aircraft usually lasts about 40 years, commercial aircraft. Well, a subway car lasts about that long too. And you think of all the technology that changes in a 40-year period.
Oh yeah.
So
massive.
I've seen these subway cars go from mechanical to electrical to electronic, to AI diagnostic in that 40-year period. And it's the same shell. It's the same car. You put different seats in it and everything, but you've gone from something that was basically totally mechanical to something that is totally electronic and diagnostic in itself. And it's an amazing process. I mean, think about one of the jobs that I had as a consultant. I did a consulting project for United Airlines, and we were building a maintenance operations center for their airplanes. And so they would, every so many years, they take an airplane, and this is done on all the airlines, they strip them down to basically the airframe. They pull everything out of there, and there's over 5 million parts in an aircraft.
Wow.
And it's almost that bad with a subway car, but it's not the same. And what they do is they pull out everything, recondition it all, and put it back together, repaint it. I mean, they go across the airframe with a spectrometer to look for cracks, et cetera, and they recondition the entire airplane basically from the ground up in usually what's 30-day period. Well, we used a lot of lean concepts in coming up with this aircraft maintenance center, and we're able to cut it down to like 22 days, which saved them billions of dollars. Because the whole thing about having an aircraft,
it's out of service.
It only
money.
If it's not in the air, it's not making money.
Exactly.
And they manage those costs extremely well in the aircraft industry. One of the things we tried to do with subway cars is try to measure that as well. And I don't know, I left by the time they were looking at it, but it's interesting because if they can recondition a subway car, if it takes 2 weeks normally, if you can cut it down to, 6, 7, 8 days, you're saving a tremendous amount of money in that you don't have to have extra subway cars in the system when you take something out.
Right.
You don't need as many.
Exactly. Challenging how we do things and looking for those opportunities to get that competitive advantage and
exactly
performance overall. All right, cool. So before we get into wrap up, Gary, any other sage advice you might offer to the audience of things that we can go do to get out in front of these challenges?
Well, I really would look at, if you're a supply chain person, and that's what I am, what I wasn't, and what I continue to be. Look at your supply chain in terms of the 4 elements: the people that you need, the equipment that you need, the material that you need to buy, and the space that you need, and manage those processes as, both together and separately to make sure that you have, the right people in the right place, doing the right jobs, that you're buying the right material and sourcing it both competitively, and that you understand who your suppliers are.
Right. The sustainability side of it, managing
the sustainability side of it, but also looking at those what you're buying and saying, is this a commodity, or is this something that if I don't have it and I can't get it, I could be out of business? Because there are things that there may not be a lot of them, but there's there are things out there that if you don't have it and all of a sudden there's a problem with your supplier, long lead time or whatever, you could be out of business. I mean, just
exactly.
Go back to using the old story of, what was it, the phone, what was it, Edison, and it was two phone companies, and this is back, 20, 25 years ago, when there was a fire in a plant that made chips, and it shut down the plant. One company looked at it and said, we better find another supplier real quick. And the other ones listened to the supplier who said, oh, we'll be back up and running in the next 2 weeks. Turned out it took 6 months.
Yeah.
One was out of business, one kept going. I can't remember the names of those companies. I think it was Ericsson, and I can't remember the name of the other one, but one of them stayed in business and one of them was gone.
Yeah. All right. Well, Gary, you've shared some really good bits and gems of wisdom here, and helping us think about, the overall end-to-end supply chain, what's changed, why it's changing, and some key areas that we really have to be looking at carefully. If people want to get in touch with you or learn more, how do they get in touch with you and learn more?
Well, they can reach me via LinkedIn, connect with me there. They can also reach me via email. My email address is gasmith.cpim@gmail.com.
Okay.
Or they can give me a call. You've got my number.
Yes, sir. They can get in touch with us, and I'll connect with Gary if they need help getting in touch with Gary. So, Gary, great job today. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Ron. It's been a pleasure and quite an honor. So thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for joining MetaPod. For requests on topics or to ask questions, you can connect with Ron Crabtree 3 ways: via email at metapod@metaexperts.com, via LinkedIn, or by calling him directly at 734-425-1455, extension 103. Lastly, if you love the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. We truly appreciate all your support.